Welcome to Chatsu-Nani. Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Chatsu-Nani. I'm Satsunami, and joining me today is none other than the perfect idol himself. You may know him by stage name as Green Shield 95, but today he is joining us as Andrew. Andrew, welcome to Chatsu-Nani.
Thank you, and I hope to shed my good girl image and make it out there in the big world of podcasting.
Yeah, I can't wait for that. Yeah. When's the AJ film coming out?
Oh, it's already been out. It's been out years. I just haven't told you about it yet.
Well, I have to end the episode to go look for it. Well, that's the shortest episode of Chatsu-Nani. Jokes aside, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm okay. It's in the spooky season currently. I don't know if the episode will make it into the Halloween Spectacular month, but it's currently October here, not to time date this too much. And yeah, I'm excited to be watching spooky films like the psychological thriller that we're talking about today.
And what psychological thriller would you be talking about?
That's none other than Satoshi Kon's Perfect Blue, a anime movie about a idol who decides to break out of her role and try and break into a different industry. It does not go super well for her, so that's kind of where the sort of psychology and the horror aspect of it kind of comes in. But yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about it a bit more.
As well, you will especially be aware of this because you were there, but you and I, and of course Adam, we all recorded during, I think it was last Christmas, wasn't it? Or Christmas time.
Yeah, it was around about November, December time of last year.
Yeah, we recorded an episode for another Satoshi Kon film, that of course being Tokyo Godfathers. And Satoshi Kon, unfortunately, he died relatively young and he left behind quite a limited filmography. Yeah, he left behind some quite iconic films. He's directed films like, as we said, we've got Perfect Blue, we've got Tokyo Godfathers, Paprika, Paranoia Agent, was that him as well?
It was. That was a TV series though.
So he's very distinctive, and no more does this show, of course, than with Perfect Blue. And as you said, it's about this psychological thriller involving a former idol trying to break out and trying to, make it as something other than their alter ego, which of course, without giving too much away, goes horribly wrong for her. But before we get into that, we tear apart, as it were, this particular topic. How did you hear about this movie?
I've known about Perfect Blue for a long time, actually, but I didn't get around to watching it till quite recently. It's kind of always been on my periphery. My older brother was a big fan of this movie and Satoshi Kon's work when I was younger, and he had it on DVD, but because of its reputation of being a bit of a more mature movie with its themes and its artistic directions, I was not in a place where I felt like I could watch it yet. And so it took me a very long time to eventually get around to watching, and it's always been one that I wanted to watch. And so this podcast actually gave me a good excuse to watch it with my partner. But I've known of it for such a long time, both because of my brother and because of the wider anime community's regard for this movie. It's incredibly influential, and it has inspired so many movies as a result of this, some of which, such as Black Swan, the Western movie about the ballerina, have been denied by its creator, but the influences seem pretty convenient if it's not otherwise influenced. So yeah, that's kind of my experience of it. What was your experience with this film and Satoshi Kon's work?
Well, the first time I remember actually seeing this film was through a friend who had recommended it, and this particular friend and I watched probably like a range of very strange films, like Twin Peaks. I know that's a TV series, but that kind of thing, Event Horizon, those kind of mind twisty films, to put it very, very nicely. And I always remember watching Perfect Blue for the first time and just being quite taken aback by it. It wasn't something that I was, to be quite honest, I was used to. I was quite shocked at it. I thought, wow, they really got away with certain things in this anime. It was definitely one of those ones that I thought, wow, this is really something different. And I know that's a vast understatement, but in terms of Satoshi Kon's other work, I'm going to be honest, I wasn't as knowledgeable about them until, of course, you introduced me to Tokyo Godfathers, which I think is probably only the second film from Kon that I've actually watched. The first one, of course, being Perfect Blue, and then Tokyo Godfathers a couple of years after. But it is a very hard-hitting film, isn't it?
Yeah, Perfect Blue is certainly very different in tone to the likes of Tokyo Godfather, and another one, you didn't mention it earlier actually, but Millennium Actress is another one of Satoshi Kon's works, which I have seen. Those are the only three, I believe, that I have seen of Satoshi Kon's, and a bit of Paranoia Agent. Perfect Blue is very different in tone from a lot of his other works. There's a lot of similar aspects for sure in the cinematography and the themes, but it is much darker, I would say, in its depiction of a celebrity's life and how hard it can be for someone in the entertainment industry to change into a different role within that industry. There's a relevance to the movie and its themes of star trying to change industries that sort of holds up today, and an aspect of what we would now call a parasocial relationship that a star has, a celebrity has with his or her or their fans. That is so interesting, and I have not seen it done, at least in this depth, in any other medium. Perfect Blue highlights an aspect of society that is not well represented and fleshes it out into a phenomenal story.
And the fact that it came out in 1997, going back to something you were saying there, it's absolutely incredible how on point the commentary is for this particular film.
Most definitely.
You see, and again, I won't go too much into it just now, but there's like particular scenes where you see the actress with a computer, and it's like one of those old Mac computers with the chunky backs and everything, like long obsolete now, but back then it was like, oh, cutting edge technology. And it's amazing to think that this kind of film, although it was made in 1997, it still reflects our society today, whether that of course be typical celebrities like singers and actors and actresses, the Hollywood elite as it were, or something more common nowadays with content creators online. So you've got Twitch streamers, YouTubers, TikTokers, Instagrammers, influencers, whatever umbrella term you want to use there. It's just so amazing how reflective it is of that relationship between both fan and creator. Before we dive into that, I've got a quick question for you. So I was looking up the trivia for this particular film, and it turns out that apparently this film was supposed to be live action, but due to several backers pulling out at the last minute during the production, they decided to follow the anime route and the animation as a whole. Do you think that this film would have worked in live action, or do you think as it is, it succeeds in what it's trying to convey?
I do very much think it succeeds in what it's trying to convey, and I do think this film would work in live action. I think it would be challenging for whoever was directing this film in live action, but it's not an impossible movie. Like there's certain things in anime that are much more difficult to adapt to live action despite attempts. Like Dragon Ball is always going to be tricky to adapt, whereas something like this, which despite it's not supernatural, but it's psychonatural almost aspects of it, it still would not be incredibly difficult to replicate in a live action format. You would need some phenomenal actors to take on those parts, because the emotions and the psychology being shown would have to be displayed in such a unique and interesting way that an actor would have to spend a lot of time doing. It's one of those things where like you worry about them diving too deep into the role and getting in trouble in that regard. What do you think? What is your opinion on that?
So what you're saying is you don't want a Jared Leto style actor coming into this film to method act.
Yeah, I don't think we necessarily need a Jared Leto stalker personifying the role.
I mean, plus he doesn't, no offence to Mr. Leto, but I don't think he probably has the height for the character I'm actually thinking about. Just him with platform boots. But anyway, sorry, my fan fiction aside, will we just dive into what makes Perfect Blue such a perfect, I was going to say perfectly blue film.
Oh,
you know, it is blue, it is very blue.
It is a blue film.
So will we just dive into it?
Yeah, I think so.
Before we cut to the ad break, I just want to put out a disclaimer before we talk about the the themes of this film. We are going to be diving into a lot of potentially sensitive topics, including things like sexual assault and stalking in particular, of course, as we're talking about. So if you are sensitive to any of those topics, please feel free to pause or stop this episode now. But just giving you a heads up just before you go into this, we're going to be talking about themes of mental health, and again, we're going to be referring to things like parasocial relationships as well as objectification. So just a fair warning in case you're going into this episode expecting our usual bubbly selves, just please be warned for that. But without any further ado, we will be right back after these messages. Welcome to Chatsu-Nani, a variety podcast that discusses topics from gaming and films to anime and general interests.
Previously on Chatsu-Nani, we've analysed what makes a good horror game, conducted a retrospective on Pierce Brosnan's run as James Bond, and listened to us take deep dives into both the Sonic and Halo franchises.
Also, if you're an anime fan, then don't forget to check us out on our sub-series, Chatsu-Nani, where we dive into the world of anime. So far, we've reviewed things like Death Note, Princess Mononoke, and the hit Beyblade series.
If that sounds like your cup of tea, then you can check us out on Spotify, iTunes, and all good podcast apps.
As always, stay safe,
Stay awesome, and most importantly,
stay hydrated.
Hey everyone, I'm Laura.
And I'm Jill.
And we are the hosts of Crime Divers podcast. We are Scottish sisters who tell each other true crime cases that other hasn't heard of.
New episodes are released every Tuesday, and you can find us on your favourite podcast platform.
So what are you waiting for? Grab your wetsuit and join us as we dive into the world of true crime.
But remember, watch out for those sharks!
This episode is sponsored by Zencastr. If you're a podcaster that records remotely like me, then you'll know how challenging it can be to create the podcast you've always wanted. That's where Zencastr comes in. Before I met Zencastr, I was but a naive podcaster, recording on low quality, one-track audio waves. But with Zencastr, you can kiss those fears goodbye as they provide crystal clear audio and HD video. Plus, with our all-in-one podcasting suite, recording with guests is extremely simple. From local recordings to post-production, Zencastr has it all. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code Chatsu-Nani. You'll get 30% off your first 3 months of Zencastr Professional. I want you to have the same easy experience I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story. So, before we go on and talk about the main themes of this particular film, Andrew, what is Perfect Blue about?
Perfect Blue is the story of a singer, part of a Japanese pop idol girl group, who quits her band to become an actress. She learns through doing that it is not an easy change for her, and that to be taken seriously and get away from her good girl image in order to further her career, she has to represent herself in more adult ways. And that comes at the cost of her own mental health, and also she receives the ire from her previous fans who loved her from her previous image and does not want that to change.
And that is the funny thing though, because as I said, although this came out in 1997, we have seen particular artists and content creators make that shift. One of the most prolific examples I can think of off the top of my head is Miley Cyrus. You know, she was like one of these Disney actresses. She did the whole Hannah Montana thing, and then, you know, that small indie gem known as Hannah Montana. And then, of course, as soon as she broke out of that Disneyfication, if that's even the term, yeah, she became very overtly sexual, and she had that whole Wrecking Ball phase and everything. So it's not one of these hard to believe scenarios, is it?
No, I mean, and you cited one example there. I mean, you can also talk about someone like Britney Spears, going even further back. The idea of breaking out of a good person image, these entertainers are having to kind of go a step further to try and like overcompensate, or maybe not overcompensate, but try and get out of that innocent mindset or persona. So they are, as a result, sort of taking on a lot more adult roles and personifications of themselves.
Especially the fact that Mima is part of this girl band called Cham. They are very, I don't want to say stereotypical, but you know that way, they're very pop idol-y, they're
Cookie cutter.
Yeah, exactly. The kind of quintessential girl group of J-pop. You know, they've got the cutesy costumes, they all dance together in relative sync, which is actually quite a fun fact about that. At the very beginning there is like a concert for Cham, and they purposely edit it so they're out of sync to give it a more like realistic look to it, which I actually thought was really neat, fun animation fact of the night there. But going back to Mima, who I'm not saying like we don't know enough about the character pre-Cham days, as it were, but she's lived in this bubble of, oh, she's an idol, she has a set path to follow, she has an image to uphold, and of course at the very beginning she announces that she is going to be leaving the band, she's going to be breaking out, doing her own thing, which of course draws the ire of a lot of very angry fans, and of course one particular fan that we will come back to. But it's this idea as well, and it's quite a disturbing reality. It's not even just contained to this film, and again, like I'm speaking mainly from a male perspective. Like, of course, you and I, Green Shield, we are both men. We can't speak, you know, from a female perspective, but it does seem that it's quite an issue for a lot of these female content creators or female artists, singers, whatever background they come from, where there's that caveat of, oh, if you want to break out, that's fine, but there's going to be this sense of objectification that's going to follow you around. And we see that later on, where of course, not going too in-depth yet, but she goes into roles that are considered more mature and edgy, and I'm saying edgy, not ironically here, but, you know, like crime dramas and things where she has to expose herself, and it's a very disturbing thing to consider. But what are your thoughts on it?
It is something that the movie deals with very well. It's hard to say what the difference within Western culture is as opposed to Japanese culture, because some of the roles that she is asked to perform in, both as at one point an entirely nude model where everything is on display, which personally that was very shocking. I don't think I've ever seen an anime TV show or movie that has had an entirely nude character in it where like everything was on display. That was very surprising. And also a scene of sexual assault where her character in the movie that she is playing is raped. And that seemed interesting in that I don't know necessarily that would be the norm for young actors in Western media. And so which sort of made me curious as to whether or not that is a common aspect for actors in Japanese media, if they are often required to do these kinds of roles and whether or not these scenes are frequent in that media. I know you probably can't speak on that. You probably don't know any more than I do in that, but it is an interesting one, because I don't think that would necessarily be the case over here, what she had to go through and what caused her own issue of her self-image and her identity crisis.
Yeah, because it does seem as if, and again, we're speaking purely from like a Western perspective, but it does seem that way, that maybe not to that extent, but there is that idea that people want to generate controversy. You know, they want to have the complete opposite of what they were before. You know, it's almost as if they're like shedding their skin and they're stepping into like a new body of, oh, look at me, I'm this reborn, different actor, actress, singer, whatever. And that's what seems to be going on here. She's shedding this past that she had as Mima from Cham to Mima, the actress. It's quite heartbreaking to see that at times, because even though, as you said, she goes through that horrific sexual assault scene, she goes through that scene where she's asked to model nude and everything, even though she's got this bubbly, what you would expect, and again, I'm not reducing this to say, oh, it's just like an anime, because it's so much more than that at times, but it's very much the kind of anime mindset of, I'm going to try my best, I'm going to, like our idol self, I'm going to do my best, I'm going to do this and that. And then, of course, when she gets home, she absolutely breaks down, because the tipping point is a very human moment where she finds her fish and she tries to feed them, but of course, because she's been working all this time, the fish wish her dead, and she has an absolute breakdown. She smashes everything. She says, I never wanted to do this, even though her manager, Rumi, tried to fight against it and say, no, don't do it. But she's adamant. She wants to do it. She wants to break out and show people. And that's kind of the horrific thing, that she feels as if she has to prove herself in that way. You know, like, obviously that would be her choice. Like, if she wanted to do that, that's completely her choice. But you can see she doesn't want to do it. You can see she keeps saying, oh, I'll do it for the content is a bit reductive, but you know, oh, I'll do it for, you know what I mean though, it's like for the money. And even her agent, he seems like the stereotypical character you would think, oh, he's a sleazy guy, like a sleazy agent who wants to, you know, exploit her for money and everything. And then you actually see after the sexual assault scene where he's in the car and everything and he's talking to her, and you know, he says he'll take her out to a meal because he just feels so bad that this former idol and squeaky clean character has just gone through that. And it's just absolutely horrific. But of course, that leads to another very sinister part of this film, that of course being the antagonist. And it's right in saying, isn't it, that spoilers here, but there are two central antagonists.
Yeah, central being the key word, because I mean, there's an argument to be made as to a variety of psychological antagonists within the movie, that she herself is her own antagonist. But yes, there are two characters in the movie that could be definitely described as the antagonists of the film. One who is been ever present as a kind of looming threat, and another who is revealed later on in the movie.
So will we talk about the first one, the obvious one, as it were?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. From the very outset of the movie, where we see Mima performing on stage, we see a very strange looking man who is like some sort of Japanese Quasimodo.
Jesus. Don't go back, Andrew.
Not quite. This Japanese man who has very peculiar features, and today would be kind of described as your sort of typical like internet stereotype of someone who's very insular and stays inside all the time and doesn't interact with many people. But here he is acting as a bodyguard at her show, and he seems to be entranced by her. And when some hooligans start causing a bit of a rabble, he confronts them and ends up getting beaten up as a result. This is kind of to show his protective nature towards her. And at one point during her performance, he holds up his hand, so it looks like Mima is dancing on his palm, which demonstrates very much a possessive nature to him and his relationship with Mima, that he sees this idol as his and his alone, and that it stays in this form, and this is the form that he sees Mima in.
Yeah, it's very interesting the way a lot of these shots are framed. In particular, as you said, when he's holding her almost from a distance, it looks as if he is holding her more like a doll or something like that, as opposed to, you know, recognising her as a human being with thoughts, with feelings, with free will. Throughout the film, of course, you see that he starts harassing her, and he starts saying things like, oh, you're not the real Mima. There's a reason behind it, and we will get onto that. But again, it amplifies something that you brought up earlier, that of course being the idea of parasocial relationships, which, don't get me wrong, parasocial relationships have always been there. You have people who stalk celebrities, you have people who stalk, basically pre-internet, there are stalkers. Like, you can't get away from the fact that that was the case. But the thing that I absolutely adore is the wrong word to say, but I think is absolutely done brilliantly, is the fact that they do something that pretty much parallels today's society, doesn't it? Where you've got all these content creators online, myself included, of course, where they put their lives out there, they talk about different things, and they get people who latch on to others. For example, I don't know if you saw this, I'm going to name drop another, you might have heard of this famous podcast, or indie podcast I should say, that of course being Trash Taste. And in one of their live shows, I don't know, you've probably seen this, but there was a video of a guy who ran up onto the stage while they were doing a panel, and he just sat beside them. Did you see that video?
I did, yeah. And I remember them talking about it after the fact. An idea of fans who become too comfortable with a particular celebrity or influencer and describing the definition of parasocial relationship, but essentially believing that the relationship that is very much one-sided is reciprocal, even though the fan knows so much more about the creator's life than the creator does on the fan, that they are friends, that they have a existing relationship, and an expectation that it will be reciprocated. I think in the actual case of the trash taste situation, the person wasn't even really a fan and was just kind of there and just thought it would be funny. It's not necessarily a situation of parasocial relationships, but those do exist for sure. And it isn't a current issue, as you said. This has existed. The term is very much modern, but this has existed for a very long time. I do recommend the history podcast that's called You're Dead to Me. And they actually do an episode all about the history of fandom. And they discuss parasocial relationships in like 16 and 1700s. Kind of thing, which is very interesting. Continue listening to this episode before you go check that out, but do check that out. Yeah, finish what we're saying. What we're saying is very important, and we love you. Our parasocial relationship is one that is very much reciprocated. We know and love everything about you. Isn't that right, Satsunami?
So if you want to get in contact with Andrew, you can... No, I'm not kidding. Stay awake. No, I know exactly what you mean, though. It's definitely, as you said, it's nothing exactly new, but I mean, especially in this day and age, there seems to be like an ongoing, I don't want to say trend, that's completely the wrong word, but an ongoing thing of having these contemporary and updated terms. The idea again of the parasocial relationship, as you said, it's this one-way street into somebody's life. And it is freaky because there's real life examples as well. I can't remember off the top of my head the woman's name, but there was actually a Japanese idol who, I don't know if you heard about this, they had like a stalker who zoomed in on like a picture of them, and they zoomed into their eye, and they managed to recognise where she was based on like the reflection of her eye. There's a scale, there's a spectrum of like how fanatical certain fans are going to be. That's unfortunately a fact of this particular area. And in the case of this stalker who refers to himself as Me Mania, personally for me, I think this is obviously bar the sexual assault scene and quite a few other scenes, but one scene that really got to me, and I don't think it got to me when I first watched this film, maybe I was too young to think about the ramifications of this, but there's a particular scene where Mima gets a computer from her manager Rumi, and Rumi teaches her how to use it, and she's using it like a child. She's very much, this childhood wonder of hitting the keys with 2 index fingers and everything. She's having so much fun, and then she looks up her own name, which, if you're a celebrity, never look up your own name on the internet. That's just rule 1. But she looks up her own name, and she comes across this website that basically she thinks it's like a fan page, and she's like, oh, this is funny. They're basically pretending to be me, doing all these concerts. And then the further she reads on, her face, and can I just say the animation is absolutely fantastic at conveying this. Her face just drops immediately from one of childish glee to just absolute dread and horror as they start documenting, oh, I went to this shop for milk, this particular brand of milk. I went to this place because I love this food. I love that. And it was getting so intimate that she just starts freaking out and she starts obsessing over it. But yeah, as you were saying before, the stalker takes this role of, I suppose, a white knight is what we would call it, on someone else's behalf, whether they want it or not. They are seeing themselves as a saviour to someone they consider weaker and more vulnerable. And by doing that, they portray themselves as the hero. It's a bit like fairy tale logic, isn't it? Where everybody wants to be like the brave knight or the brave hero who rescues the princess and everything, and they want to get that reward at the end. So whether or not that's what this character's thinking, or because towards the end it gets a bit more, sinister than that. He wants to usurp her position, as it were. He wants her gone because he thinks that Mima is the quote-unquote fake. But what are your thoughts on that, though? Just like the whole part about her finding this entry of her online and how the stalker basically documents her journey.
More so than her attempting to change industries, her real biggest mistake was entering the online world. That was just error number one.
Rule number one, guys.
Yeah, exactly. But no, it is, as you said, it's fantastically well done and represented. She goes through, and I think it's actually later revealed that the stalker who we are aware of is not the one that's making these comments. It is someone else. But to the point you were making about his sort of white knighting, I'm not sure as much. I mean, there's certainly an argument to be made in that respect. I think it is more of a case of possessiveness. I think he is seeing someone else using her in ways that he is not comfortable with, that he imagined himself with her, and is seeing this other side that is not the Mima that he knows and loves and that he owns. There's at one point after her naked photo shoot, which is being distributed in magazines, where he discovers this and so buys every copy. And it isn't a perverted reason. It's not that, oh my God, she's naked, I have to see them all. It's, she's naked, I don't want anyone else to see this. So he buys up everything. And there's the scene where he's purchasing it and he's like sweating and like he looks like your kind of common kind of like pervert trying to purchase pornography. But you understand with him that that's not the case. He is not doing it for that reason, at least not mainly for that reason. He is attempting to prevent her image from being sullied in both the wider world, but more so in his own mind, and that by removing that from this one newsstand that he's purchasing it from, he feels that he is doing his part to remove the fake Mima from the world. Touching
on that scene where he buys all those images, I like the fact that all the background characters look at him quite, they look at him as if, what the hell is he doing? But it's not done for comedic effect, when you have an anime film or something like that, and they'll have the exaggerated expressions and they'll look as if, oh, why is he buying so many booby pics? Oh.
Nosebleed.
Exactly. Oh, Don't get me started, that's another episode. Yeah, my rants aside, they look at him very realistically as if that is a very weird thing to do, and for obvious reason. And you're completely right, it's a form of possessiveness that has it manifests itself in just such horrible ways, from him turning up at her work, and then her psychological state starts to degrade, that you don't know what's happening, like whether certain things are actually happening or she's just like completely imagining it. And it's something that you'd mentioned to me before we came on about the whole idea of the cinematography of this film, which is fantastic, but it's absolutely mind-blowing at times, isn't it?
It is so interesting, the cinematography, both, I don't know if the artistic direction and the cinematography could be two different arguments, I guess, and two different points, but both are so interesting because they manage to accomplish so much detail without adding a lot of detail. Like there's aspects to the movie that is not super detailed in its drawing, like the facial expressions, or the facial features rather, are pretty standard. There's nothing really too detailed about them, but the backgrounds are always gorgeous and like very detailed, and the expressions, the frame rates that are utilized allow it to express so much in this. I don't want to keep saying basic, because it's not. It's very much not, and it's an art style that is dated, I would say. I don't think that this particular style is utilized in modern anime, and the direction, cinematography direction representing the characters kind of in their psychosis shows just where they are in their mindset, and is able to convey so much from just a camera angle, so much from just, it's hard to say camera angle because it's not, I always find it very hard to describe with anime, like the different kind of angles that are utilized in what would be a sort of camera angle in a live action movie, and the different sort of metaphors that are represented through very kind of simple scenes.
No, you're completely right. It's actually amazing how they actually achieve these, as you said, shots is probably the wrong word, but the framing is absolutely fantastic. And when we get into that part of the film where Mima just starts to lose it. Her mental state starts to degrade so rapidly. You can certainly tell that the film reflects that by being fractured and leaping ahead and back in time, and it's all over the place, and that is just such an intense moment. So much so that she starts dreaming of herself stabbing people and aiming for the balls, as it were, in one particularly horrific scene. That's the reason I don't order Domino's. That's all I'll say. Terrified me. But yeah, it's that idea of her trying to piece her mind together, trying to be a stable person, and it's just everything's getting to her at once. It's fantastically done. I can't stress that enough. It's just the way you watch her go from this, keep saying stereotypical, but that kind of typical pop idol, or J-pop idol, sorry, where she's very happy, she's innocent, she's naive, and then she just falls down this rabbit hole of such sinisterness and just horror, really. Psychological horror to be exact, but I think the worst thing as well, I mean, there's lots of worse things in this film, but one of the worst things is another theme of projection, which I'm sure you as well, Andrew, you'll know watching other content creators, where there's a lot of fans who will try to project their ideal image onto particular content creators. And again, it's more prevalent with online creators, but you'll see people who are obsessed even with actors or artists or musicians who they say, oh, you should be doing this particular style. And of course, when they change their normal work, it becomes just this, I don't want to say this anger, but resentment from a few hardcore fans. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And as you say, it is common in the entertainment industry for this to happen, where diverging from the norm is met with ire, that there is this kind of expectation that the status quo should be maintained, that, for example, for a YouTuber say, oh, I subscribed for this kind of content, I didn't subscribe for you to be doing this now, this isn't what I'm interested in, so it's gone downhill since then, you should be doing more of this. I know, referencing Game Grumps, I remember Aaron, who used to go by Ego Raptor, he used to be an animator, and he still, to this day, over a decade later, still gets, I wish you were still doing sort of animation, I preferred when you were doing animation, get back to doing that kind of thing. And it's been over a decade, and he still gets that. So it's one of those things where you will never please everyone with your content. So unless you're pretty confident that it will completely ruin your career to do it, then don't worry about that and try new things. Try and experiment with things you're passionate about. You don't need to do and this isn't just limited to the entertainment industry. You should not be doing things that you know that others expect of you. You should do things that are best for yourself.
Because when people, obviously, you don't have to hear this from us, or maybe you do, but healthy relationships don't stem from someone basically puppeteering you, if that makes sense. It's not healthy for someone to come into your life and dictate what you can or can't do with said life, because, going a bit deep here, but life is very short. Life is one of those very, unfortunately, finite things that we have to make the most of. So when you want to, in the case of the film, when Mima wants to become an actress, she wants the glamour and that, not glitzy lifestyle, that's a step too far, but she wants to become something other than Mima from Charm. And yet, although she can see that our colleagues, later on in the film, she sees that they are succeeding without her, and there's that kind of sense of, oh God, were they better without me? And of course we get that very famous scene, as you said, which is, I think it's featured in Requiem for a Dream as well, but it's also featured in Black Swan, where she's under the bathwater and she just screams into it, and it's such a raw emotional thing. But going back to what I was saying, when you have people like that in your life that are very controlling, very possessive, to coin a phrase from you, it's quite a horrible thing. And the horrific thing, though, is for a lot of people, you've got people who will come face to face with you, and it kind of becomes a bit more obvious, if that makes sense, that that's what they're trying to do. But for, again, going back to parasocial relationships, this is very much a one-sided conversation. Going back to Mima here, where she's got this stalker who's saying, no, you should be doing this, you should be doing overly sexual content, you should be doing this and that. And obviously Mima doesn't want to do this kind of stuff, but the fact that she's got someone who eagerly wants to step into that role as you said, as the protector to try and control life, try and gear it towards what he wants rather than what Mima wants, because Mima sees him like a handful of times throughout the film, like over a space of a couple of months, doesn't she?
Yeah, she always identifies, I mean, he's got a pretty recognisable face.
Oh yeah, it looks like he's been hit in the face with a shovel.
And you said my Quasimodo comment was rough.
Sorry, just quickly to touch on that, I know he's supposed to look like that because, and I know that was rough, apologies, but he is supposed to look like that to be the stereotypical boogeyman, if that makes sense, where he is this stereotypical stalker with the twisted features, like the features that don't kind of sit right. I know that kind of links in, again, I'm not an expert on it, but it kind of links into the issue in Japan of otaku culture, which, don't get me wrong, the West as well, especially with the UK and the United States, they have their own forms of otakus, weebs, whatever you want to call them. But in this case, it's like a more sinister version, because there are like young people there as well that obsess over one particular franchise, over one character, or in this case, one particular young woman.
Just going back to what you were saying about his appearance, that is actually one of the issues I take with the movie, and that I feel like wasn't represented particularly well. Yes and no, actually. I'm going to kind of contradict myself a little bit. There's certainly a point to be made that stalkers or just these types of people don't all look like this. They come in all shapes and sizes. They can look like your neighbors, someone who you know, someone that you work with, just can look very normal and don't necessarily stand out as being, oh, this person is definitely a stalker, look at him. And so when you kind of are in your face, as this film is, with, oh, this guy looks horrible and he's a stalker, clearly obviously bad, I don't think that is very good. However, there is the reveal later on that there is someone, that the true antagonist, the true villain, is someone that Mima knows, that is what could be described as a normal person in some aspects. So the film does turn that point on its head in a clever and interesting way, but it still does represent the stalker character, who is still a stalker, despite them not being the main antagonist. They are still an antagonist, as this stereotypical, you use the phrase otaku, and it's not wrong in any way to describe him as such. And so that is my criticism for how the character is dealt with. I don't think there's very much else wrong with this, and again, they do deal with it in a very clever way where there's misdirection used as to the true villain, but they still do represent the stalker as a very abnormal looking person.
I don't know if it's done because it's supposed to be like the red herring to throw you off who's actually pulling the strings, that of course being Rumi, or if it is just because they wanted a character who would serve the role as the villain. So you think, I get what you mean, because, and this is something that was, when we were growing up, of course, the internet was a relatively new thing. Like, obviously we had dial-up internet, we had the very slow internet, as it were, but when I was in school in particular, and I'm assuming this would be very similar to you, Andrew.
No, old man.
The future is now, old man. But you would have these classes where obviously they would be, and they still do nowadays, I would hope, they taught you about cybersecurity and making sure that you didn't give out your personal information to strangers, and all the usual tick-the-box kind of things. And that is one of the things they do drum into you, that predators, stalkers, whatever, they do not fit an archetype. They do not fit one catch-all picture or description, because there's actually a really good advert that highlights this. I can't believe I'm referencing this, but there was an advert ages ago where it showed you like a fairly, I don't know if it was Scottish or English, the advert, I can't remember, but it was basically about internet safety, and it showed you this very normal kind of, attractive looking guy who's like running around, he's helping people, he's like, oh yay, I'm such a good pillar of the community. And then it takes like a Black Mirror-esque twist where, of course, it turns out he's a predator, and he starts making sinister comments about how he's like, sending messages to young and vulnerable people to do certain things, and then he gets arrested, and it's a very like short but just a horrible, horrible advert. But again, it highlights perfectly how there's not a one catch-all image, as it were, for this particular individual. And I get what you mean, though. I totally get what you mean about that stereotypical representation of the stalker as if it's a job application or something. Yeah, speaking of that, will we go into the finale and the big twist of this film?
Yeah, I think so.
In the very end, we find out, of course, that Rumi, who is portrayed as this very kind-hearted woman who is, of course, Mima's manager / also a former pop idol, and she ends up revealing herself as being the one who, as I said before, is pulling all the strings. She is basically, I don't know if it's the right term to say she wants to become her, but she wants to become the idealised version of Mima. She wants to be that Cham version of Mima, to, again, going on to this word of projection, she wants to project herself onto her and be what she thinks she should be. And of course, there's that massive disconnect between reality and fiction where, and I think this is one you brought up to me when we were watching this film and you were sending me messages, but there's a particular scene at the end where, of course, Mima's getting chased by Rumi and she's got a knife, she's chasing after her, and you can see that her idealised version is gliding and, skating through the air and everything, but then you see a snapshot. It only lasts a couple of seconds.
Through a reflection.
Yeah, through a reflection in the window where she's running after, and she's obviously quite short. She's
portly.
Portly, thank you. That's a perfect word, portly. And she's just struggling and she's out of breath and everything. And it's a complete disconnect between reality and fiction. And one particular example that comes to mind is, if there's any UK listeners out there, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about here. But there is a soap opera that has been running for good couple of decades now called EastEnders, which is about people living in the East End of London and everything. There's drama, but a lot of people in the UK get very passionate about their soap operas, and there's one particular moment in one of the storylines where one of the women...
Spoilers for EastEnders.
I know, spoilers for this, I think it's a 10 or 15-year-old plotline. Oh, God. But, yeah, there's a scene where, unfortunately, a woman miscarries a baby, so she decides to steal someone else's, which obviously she's not in the right frame of mind. She's very hysterical. She's upset. It was quite a shocking storyline because it happened at Christmas.
Oh my God. They stole the plot of Tokyo Godfathers.
So Black Swan, Requiem for a Dream, and now we've got EastEnders. Those sons of bitches. They can't keep getting away with this. But yeah, she steals the baby, and this caused real upset with people because they're like, oh, I want to enjoy Christmas. I don't want to watch, quite a harrowing and depressing tale. It got so bad, people were going up to the actress in the street, and even though she was with her own family, like a real family, they were harassing her, they were yelling abuse at her, all kinds of horridness. It is absolutely astonishing, especially in this day and age. It's astonishing how people still can't make that separation between what is real and what is complete fiction, separating the creator from their creation, if that makes sense. Especially, obviously, there's more going on with Rumi. She's mentally unstable, she's not thinking straight, and of course that's very apparent when she keeps losing her wig. She stabs herself and nearly gets hit by a truck. What's your opinion of that, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of one of the main themes in the movie that we barely actually touched on, is this separation of reality from fiction and the character from the reality of the situation. That Mima herself would see this idolized version of herself represented in a mirror that would talk to her and taunt her, and she would chase it down a corridor. As a very on the nose metaphor of chasing after something that you've lost, an identity that you no longer have, and the kind of breakdown of what is real and what isn't, where we kept kind of shifting between scenes, and neither we the audience nor Mima in the film knew which was real and which wasn't. It would seem at times the movie that she was working on mirrored the plot of the story we were following, so we weren't sure if the entirety of what we were following was actually just the plot of this movie that she had kind of internalized. And then that happens to Rumi, where she has brought this fiction of who the idol Mima is and held on to it to such an extent that she became that she saw herself as the true reflection of that. And that kind of comes to a crashing halt when, towards the end of the chase scene, she has her wig removed, which kind of brings her briefly back into reality from this fiction that she'd created of herself as Mima, and ends up walking out into the busy road where a truck almost, or maybe does hit them, but Mima kind of saves Rumi at the end. And so it is so interesting. And that's kind of one of the big mind fucks of the movie, where you just never fully know what is reality and what isn't. As I said, there are points where you don't know if the entirety of what you watched was just internalized plot of another movie through the mind of a disturbed Mima. So it's not a movie where, if you are struggling in your own mental health, these kinds of films can often trigger responses in that. And so this is not a film that is necessarily for everyone in a current state of mind. There are times in my life where I wouldn't have been as comfortable watching this movie, whereas now I feel more comfortable to watching this and analyzing it and understanding it. When I was younger, I might have struggled more with it. And so I think this is a very important film to watch for many when they are ready, when they are able to. And some people will never be able to, and that's fine. But I do think it's a very important movie. I don't want to sort of come up to the wrapping up point just yet. We'll kind of come to that later. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that depiction of fiction and reality within the movie?
I think it's done absolutely brilliantly, to be honest. And you make a fantastic point there. It is a film that does delve into a lot of heavy themes, and the fact that mental health is tackled in this way, it's quite sensitive and quite a colourful illustration of these particular issues. You have and again, not to pardon the pun, you have these very blue and very muted colour palettes at times when Mima is going about her daily business, and that is contrasted obviously to her bright clothing, very pink and cutesy looking, and comparing that to, what she wears normally, what a normal person wears, compared to, I'm not saying J-pop idols are normal, but what I'm saying is you wouldn't really go to the shops in that on a normal basis, I don't think.
Don't judge my life.
I don't, well, not as far as I know, I haven't seen many J-pop idols come to this neck of the woods. Jokes aside, yeah, it seems as if there is a clear separation. Artistically, there is. You've got the very colourful and anime-looking girl, or woman, sorry, I should say, versus the normal, living her average life character. And where the two start to intersect is, of course, with the stalker, who clearly is not in the right frame of mind. You see he's got photos and cutouts of her plastered everywhere. And of course, that culminates at the end where he physically attacks her and assaults her, and she manages to fight him off. And it's a really horrible scene. But then, of course, we find out later that she is being emotionally manipulated by Rumi, who, whether that is a conscious choice, because here's the thing about this film. For the stalker, although you could say that, and again, I'm not a psychologist by any means, so take what I'm saying with a pinch of salt, but for him, he definitely seems to be exhibiting signs of loneliness, of isolation. This seems to be, from what we can see anyway, this seems to be the only outlet he has by obsessing over Mima, whereas Rumi doesn't seem to have that problem in terms of psychological conditions. Both of them don't marry with one another. His is probably more stemmed in that isolation and maybe social awkwardness. Again, you can't say for a fact because we don't get enough to profile him, but you don't really see him interact with many people. And when he does, it's always quite aggressive or compromising situations. It's like when he's buying the nude magazines, when he's fighting the thugs who, they're just causing issues at the concert, when he confronts Mima altogether, or he's sending hateful messages, they seem more related to that, whereas Rumi seems to be more interested in preserving what Mima was. This is an unfortunate thing as well, where people, and again, this is me generalising, but it seems as if she doesn't want to let go of the past for Mima. Mima wants to expand, spread her wings, she wants to try new things, and obviously there's a lot of seediness in the underbelly of that, but Rumi doesn't want that. She wants to keep her wings clipped, and she obviously doesn't have the social skills to straight up say, no, don't do that. I don't want you going out and doing these horrific scenes. Whereas as Mima, Rumi is identifying as this character who is confident, she's very elegant, she's very, I don't want to say fairy-like, but you know what I mean? She's very elegant, she's graceful, she glides, she doesn't walk, it's almost ethereal, if that makes sense. It's very supernatural, that she's not just a person, she's almost like a goddess, almost, that nothing can harm her.
An idol.
Yeah, exactly. That's the perfect description. She is that character people want to aspire to be. And yet her whole mindset has just completely broken at that point. And it's hard to pinpoint when this happens, because I think it's when she leaves Cham that this starts to happen. And it could have been happening well before the events of the film.
I think it is, because the implication is that Rumi was the one writing on the message boards, or the owner of the website that documented Mima's life. I think it was called Mima's Diary, and was documenting everything she does, her entire kind of daily schedule. And you kind of realize by the end that the only one who could have known all of this, more so than the stalker, was Rumi, because there were conversations that Rumi heard that was documented in the diary. So prior to the events of the movie, Rumi was already in this state of mind, and she acts out as this Mima character to almost, rather, it's not almost, it's to get revenge on those who would sully what she now sees as the ideal version of herself as Rumi, as Mima. And she goes and kills a photographer who took the naked pictures, kills the writer who wrote the scene where Mima was raped, and the agent who has been finding her these parts. Just going back to the stalker, actually, I don't know if you noticed this, but the end scene where she is grabbed by the stalker and almost sexually assaulted, or rather she was sexually assaulted but almost raped, seems to be the same stage where during the movie scene of her character being raped, that occurs. So there's kind of a mirroring of those two scenes. Don't know, did you pick up on that when you watched it?
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I don't think I picked up on that, but it's one of those things that I think subconsciously, obviously because of the content you are disturbed and everything, but it does feel like one of those subconscious things where even the shots, I could be totally wrong in this, but I'm pretty sure it's framed in the same way, that shot above the stage.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right.
Yeah, where obviously that's how they do it for when the first scene is shot in the film, and then of course when we come back to that with the reality of it and the actual stalker when she nearly indeed does get attacked. It's like a parallel almost. This is again going on to that theme of reality versus fiction, and that other scene where it's a horrible scene, don't get me wrong, I really am uncomfortable with scenes like that, but in particular this one, because she is such a innocent character, but she still wants to do her best, and God bless the actors acting with her, because you see some of them even apologise, and it doesn't seem like they're taking any pleasure from it. It's just the acting job that they've been given and everything. So you can see that although it's horrible, it's exploitative, at least she's in a safer environment. Whereas, as you said, when you go to the final scene, or rather the final scene with the stalker, you can see that she is isolated, she's alone, trapped on this stage with this killer or stalker, killer, whatever he's going to do to her. And it's a horrible, haunting scene, and it's that sense of vulnerability again of him trying to completely, I suppose, erase her, because throughout the film, as we've established, he does take himself on as the de facto protector of her, even though obviously he's not. It's a one-way thing, but then it kind of twists into him trying to get rid of her.
Yeah, he's visited by this vision of idol Mima telling him that the current Mima is a fake and that only by killing her will it remove that fake Mima and bring back the real Mima. And so it's this kind of other level of delusion, this potentially schizophrenia from the stalker. And schizophrenia seems to be prevalent in a few of the characters in both the stalker, Mima, and Rumi, all three of which I'm not one to diagnose it, but could potentially be diagnosed with different levels of schizophrenia.
No, it's a completely valid point. I mean, even when I was doing the research for this film, there's so many mental issues that are actually discussed in this film. As you said, there's the schizophrenia side of it, and as well, one that we actually didn't mention. Of course, we mentioned the personality disorders and the projection of oneself onto an idealised form. One thing that I don't think we have discussed is depression, and of course that occurs pretty much, I think it's halfway through the film, but it's hard to pinpoint, where Mima, of course, she takes the acting role and she just spirals into this complete abyss of not knowing who she is anymore. That is quite a haunting thing, because in life we all try to establish ourselves as individuals, whether we want to be content creators, whether we want to be regular people who don't document their lives. We want to be who we are. We want to be that particular person. But at the same time, when she's getting pulled from all these sides, she's getting pulled back from her past as a member of Charm. She's getting pulled forward as a pseudo-erotic model. She's getting pulled as well by the fact she's an actress now, but then getting pulled back again at the fact that she has to do, as you said, that horrible sexual assault scene. So no wonder she slips into this absolute state of depression. As we said, there's the famous scene where she screams into the bathtub, she smashes everything.
The fish that she kind of saw as being a consistent in her life, and something that was there for her prior to her change in industry has been disrupted, and that sets her off as well. So there are definitely several scenes, and I think there's a scene when she's getting the naked photos taken where it cuts to her like in the bathroom, kind of like reeling with the decision that she's made in her career.
The thing that I think is done really well in this is the fact that, and again, like, no offence to anyone who has a pet fish and loves them dearly, but in the grander scheme of things, it does seem something relatively minor. As you said, it's this consistent that has been with her entire life, and then all of a sudden, because she forgot to feed fish, she just absolutely loses it. And it is such like a human moment, because that is like one of the things with depression. All it takes is one particular moment to set off someone. It's not just a case of, oh, I'm sad. People aren't going to react differently to various symptoms of depression. They're not going to isolate themselves on the one hand, or they're not going to hurt themselves on the other. There's obviously that variation, but with Mima, of course, she just absolutely lashes out. She loses it. She has that breaking point over something. Again, I don't want to out the poor fish and be like, oh, well, they don't matter, but it's just such a shame that this is the moment that pushes her over the edge. Something you kind of think, oh, it's a minimal moment, and it's just utterly been blown out of proportion. Then, of course, she really struggles from that point on to lift herself back up. So it's a really interesting moment. So it's clear that this film definitely dives into like a plethora of various mental health issues, mental health states. It's interesting. You can't take your eyes away from the depictions in this film. But before we wrap up, we should probably talk about the unfortunate quote-unquote ends of these characters. Of course, the end of Rumi and her kind of reign of terror over Mima, and of course the death of the stalker. So do you want to take it away in this one?
Sure. So the stalker, it's not fully clear the demise of the stalker, because Mima successfully manages to grab a hammer during his sexual assault of her and whack him on the head. And so So he kind of flails to the side, and then she leaves the area and finds Rumi, and then when they return, he's gone. But we later see that he is lying dead with her other agent who's been finding her these kind of seedy roles, both dead together. And so the implication could either be that he did survive that, got up and was then killed by Rumi, or that Rumi just took away his dead body after Mima killed him and just put them together. So that I don't feel was fully clear. Don't know what your interpretation of that was. Yeah, and then later on, at the very end of the movie, following Rumi defeat, and where she then walks in front of traffic, is stopped by Mima from being hit by a truck. We then cut to a psychiatric facility, where Rumi is a patient, and we learn that more often than not, she is in this state of fiction, of continuing to believe that she is either Mima or a depiction of an idol character that is not her true life, and that she very rarely now has these lucid moments of being Rumi. And so we leave this state where Rumi is receiving psychiatric assistance, is getting the care she needs, and Mima leaves the facility seemingly as a celebrity and having made this career for herself, because she is immediately recognized by some of the nursing staff there and saying, "Is that Mima? No way is it Mima? She wouldn't be at a place like this. She's too big of a star." So through that, we can kind of infer that she has made it as the star that she wanted to, and it has been a success for her, but we don't know what her mental state is currently at, if she is better, or where the events of the film have taken her psychologically.
Because is that not the last line of the film where she says, "I'm the real Mima," and then it kind of cuts to the credits?
Yeah, she seems to break the fourth wall and address the audience at that point, which is a very interesting decision on the part of Satoshi Kon. Don't know what your thoughts were on that. Do you feel that met the tone of the movie, or do you feel that was a little bit of a juxtaposition?
Yeah, no, I would agree with you in that. It seems like quite a clean ending. Throughout the film, we have these very fragmented and disjointed moments. We have the other characters, as you pointed out, meeting utterly brutal and grisly ends. And you have, of course, the stalker who comes in, and he meets his end and everything. And it's quite a dark and brooding film, even in the beginning, where it's like the pop band and they're all happy and, oh, look, we're singing our favourite song. And even then, there's some sinister elements, like, as we established earlier, the stalker holding his hand up for Mima and everything. But then we get to the ending, and Mima has this action hero line at the end, if that makes sense. That kind of, "I'm the real Mima," cigar in mouth, drives away. She doesn't do that, by the way.
Too much Terminator month for you.
Exactly. She turns right to Rumi and goes, "I'll be back." No, she doesn't. But I agree with you. It doesn't seem to fit the overall tone. This is the only other representation I can think of, is the fact that objectively Mima is locking away her charm persona for good in the form of Rumi. And not in a literal sense, but in the sense that Rumi so desperately wants to be Mima. She wants to be this pop idol again. She wants to be up there singing as this elegant pop star, whereas Mima just wants to separate herself from that. She wants to be her own person. As we've established, she wants to be this actress and everything. So physically, she's technically separating her past, that of course being represented by Rumi and her desire to be that singer, that idol, and she is driving away to say, "I'm the real Mima," thereby shedding that past self. I don't know if I'm looking too deep into that. Like, what are your thoughts there?
No, I think you're correct there. You've summed up in better ways than I could have. I think that very much is the case. Yeah. There's not too much more I can say to that. I think that's very well said. What were your final thoughts then of this movie? And would you recommend it to other people? And you're allowed to caveat that with exceptions or the kinds of people who might enjoy this and might not.
I would say this is an absolutely fantastic film. From the art style to the way the story unfolds to the cinematography, if that makes sense for an anime film. But the fact that it explores mental health health issues and just such deep, deep themes within it is it's incredible. And it's one of those films that stands as a testament to what anime can be. You know, it doesn't have to be, when you think of anime, it doesn't have to be about giant robots or people yelling loudly with crazy haircuts or looking for the One Piece after 1,000 episodes. I'm sorry, Andrew, I had to put in a One Piece dig there. I'm sorry.
I will be the king of the pop idols.
Oh god, it would have been a completely different film if he was in it. But at the end of the day, this film is not going to be for everyone. Whether you are sensitive to these kind of topics or going a step further, if you yourself are experiencing these kind of things, in the case of depression or, you know, schizophrenia, borderline personality disorder, it's a heavy, heavy film. So if you are sensitive to these kind of themes, well, I wouldn't strongly advise against it, but I would say know what you're getting yourself into. I wouldn't say, oh yeah, go in, you'll be fine. This isn't like Tokyo Godfathers, where, don't get me wrong, there's some really interesting themes going on there, but it's a lot more light-hearted, it's a lot more comical. It's not like Perfect Blue. Perfect Blue is its own entity. I would recommend this film. I would recommend this to people, but as you said, under the caveat of you know what you're getting yourself into. I don't want people to go out and think, oh, this is going to be a really interesting character study, which it is, but it always reminds me when I was in university and we had like a psychology class where they basically said, oh, do you know what you should do? You should go out and you should watch Black Swan. Even to this day, like, I'm a bad student, I didn't watch it. If I had seen that in the wrong mental state, or if I'd watched Perfect Blue in the wrong mental state, obviously that's going to affect me personally, and that is not something I'm okay with having on my conscience and having on you guys listening at home as well. So go into it if you are mentally prepared for it. I feel as if as well this film needs a sense of mental maturity. I feel as if you watch this film when you're a little bit younger, like why you would be watching it, I don't know, but even if you're like a teenager or, you know, you weren't in the right mind space for it, then you're not going to get the full impact. You're not going to get the full themes, the full setting, what the director intends with X, Y, and Z. But otherwise, yeah, I would say this is a fantastic film that if you're into that character study and such, definitely check it out, because it is a fascinating film.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think the point you make there is interesting as well. There will be some teenagers who will watch this and will understand the movie and understand its themes. I don't think I would have as a teenager, or even probably into my early adult years, might not have understood it as well as I do now. I think this is a very important movie. This film, not just in the world of anime, I think this is one of the most important anime films. It is up there with Akira and some of the sort of important ones of Studio Ghibli, The Princess Mononoke, Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, these kind of films. I think this is incredibly important for Japanese film and just film in general. I think this is something that should be experienced. As Satsunami pointed out, there are always caveats to that if you are not in the mental state that is appropriate to watch this, then you do not need to. If you feel you are able to, then go ahead and watch it. It is very important for many, and there will be cases where it will come at a different time for you. I did try and watch it when I was younger, and it wasn't for me. I came back to it many years later and was in awe by it. So I cannot recommend enough that everyone at some point in their lives do watch this film. Do embrace it. And I hold such high esteem and such great praise for Satoshi Kon and his work. I think movie for movie, he is one of the greatest film directors ever, and his work should be held at the highest regard. I have so far only watched 3 of his films and 1 of his TV show. I am looking forward to watching some more of it, and I encourage others to follow up and watch his filmography. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on the situation.
First of all, you summed it up perfectly there, but one quick thing I would want to add, just going back to what you were saying about you not maybe being ready for this film, like when you were younger, and I completely agree. I would have been exactly in the same boat. I don't think I would have been as mature to understand everything, and it's something that, and this is going to make me feel so old, but it's something that when you're going through life and every year goes by, not to be depressing to end the episode in a bummer, but
because the episode itself was a real lighthearted romp.
it was like, you know what, I'm not even going to make a joke. I'm not even going to make a joke. Yeah, oh no, absolutely. But as the years go on, you start to see different things, you start to experience different things, and of course, during the 2020 Great Panini, as it's called, everybody was trapped in the homes and everything, and of course, personally, I took up podcasting and Twitch streaming, but obviously, my experience as a male content creator is definitely not going to be anywhere near the struggles of female content creators or anything like that, but it also gives me a different perspective in how I view this film as someone who puts out content. And don't get me wrong, I'm not someone who is in the limelight, I'm not anybody famous, you're going to listen to this and probably just move on to the next podcast, and that's perfectly okay. But even still, from that smaller micro perspective, I will say that it does give me a kind of appreciation to see how someone who would be in the spotlight is affected so horribly. So it's a fascinating film in that regard. And also something that, of course, Andrew, you and I were discussing before we came on was the fact that it is very hard to find this film. It's not on, as far as I remember, it's not like on Amazon or Netflix, is it?
No, it's not on, as far as I'm aware, it's not on any of the streaming services, which is so surprising given, even the Western world, this is one of the major anime films. I wouldn't say it's necessarily mainstream, but it is relatively well known. So it does surprise me that I had such a tough time finding a copy of this. And as is the case with a lot of anime media, it isn't always the easiest to get on DVD, or if you do find a copy, it's often very expensive. I think when I looked to buy it, it was almost, I think it was about $45, which is crazy. So it is not the easiest film to track down, but if you are able to, you should.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Again, reiterating, as long as you're ready for this film, then absolutely, please feel free to go and find a copy of this DVD and judge it for yourself. Really. Going off on the point you said about this film being quite hard to find, one of the things that I actually did see in my research was that apparently the original 35mm camera negatives were accidentally destroyed. Now, I don't know how that happens.
Yeah, I think it's actually more common than you'd think, because I've heard of several other films that had similar issues. I don't know who's responsible for films. I mean, obviously it's not just all be in Japan, and I hear about in the Western world it being a big issue as well. But yeah, so many films get lost because of that issue.
When I was looking at that, they say that because of that, all of the subsequent releases are all sourced from lower quality videos. So maybe that's the reason it's so scarce to get. But again, as you said, it's anime logic, isn't it? Well, I say anime logic. What I mean is anime supplier logic, where it is near on impossible to actually buy certain films and things, and that is just such a shame, because as I said, obviously with the caveat of if you're ready to watch it, but it is quite a shame that people aren't able to watch this film or experience it in their own way. So yeah, it's a shame, but at the end of the day, it's an absolutely fantastic film.
If you did enjoy our discussion on Perfect Blue, you should listen to our episode from last year, which co-host of the podcast Adam was on, where we discussed Satoshi Kon's Tokyo Godfathers. It makes a perfect Christmas or festive season companion podcast. So if you're listening to this closer to the Christmas time, then you should, or just any time of year really, you should check out our Tokyo Godfathers episode. If I do say so, it's very good.
And I just want to reiterate, first of all, it's great, but it's also a lot more lighthearted than this one.
Yes.
You're probably not going to get bummed out the same with that one in comparison.
Much like this and most of the podcasts that we do, there are always spoiler warnings, so we recommend that you check out the property first before listening.
On that note, thank you, Andrew, for joining me to tackle this perfectly blue film.
Thank you. Hopefully I've developed some very keen fans as a result of my appearance on this podcast.
Yeah, the Red Panda Lawyer will be in touch, don't you worry. But if you would like to find out ways to contact the Red Panda Lawyer, as Andrew was saying there, if you would like to check out more of our previous episodes, including the Tokyo Godfathers episode, you can check us out on our website, podpage.com/Chatsu-Nani. Or if you want to listen to us on your handy-dandy podcast apps, you can check us out on Spotify, iTunes, and really any good podcast app. Just look for the name Chatsu-Nani, and we will see you there. But until then, thank you all so much for listening to this episode. As always, stay safe, stay awesome, and most importantly, stay hydrated.